Welcome to HistoryFlix English. I am so excited you're here today because we're diving straight into an explainer of one of the absolute most legendary clashes in all of human history. We are talking about the true story of the Battle of Thermopylae. This isn't just some dusty 2,500-year-old conflict. This is the battle that literally defined the concept of courage for thousands of years.
So I really want you to think about this for a second. Put yourself in their shoes. What would you do if you knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that you were walking into a battle you could never, ever win? Would you run, or would you stand your ground and fight for your homeland until your absolute last breath? It's kind of the ultimate human dilemma, right? And well over 2.5 millennia ago, a tiny group of warriors had to answer this exact question. The choice they made that day, it became one of the greatest stories ever told.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, an impossible battle. To really wrap our heads around the gravity of their choice, we've got to travel back to 480 BC and look at the terrifying contrast in numbers. We're talking ultimate David versus Goliath odds here. The mighty Persian Empire, ruled by King Xerxes I, was launching one of the biggest invasions the ancient world had ever seen. And you know, his motivation was actually deeply personal. Just 10 years earlier, his dad, Darius I, had been handed a pretty humiliating defeat by the Greeks at the Battle of Marathon. So Xerxes was out for blood. He wanted to conquer Greece once and for all. So on one side, you've got the Persian invaders. Ancient writers literally claimed their army numbered in the millions. Now, modern historians think the force was a bit smaller than that, but it was still overwhelmingly massive compared to anything the Greeks had. And on the other side, just 300 elite Spartan warriors, backed up by a few thousand Greek allies. As this massive Persian war machine rolled south, you can imagine absolute panic was spreading like wildfire across the Greek city-states. Most leaders were looking at this and thinking, there's no way, we have absolutely zero chance.
Moving right along to Section 2, the hot gates.
Well, obviously not everyone gave in to that panic. One guy in particular flat out refused to surrender, and that was King Leonidas of Sparta. Instead of just cowering behind city walls waiting for an inevitable siege, Leonidas made a super bold move. He marched out to meet the enemy head-on at a very specific spot called Thermopylae, which actually translates to the hot gates. Now, Thermopylae wasn't just some random open field. It was a really narrow mountain pass. Why does that matter? Because it completely limits the number of soldiers who can physically swing a weapon at any given time. It was a brilliantly chosen geographical choke point that completely neutralized the massive Persian size advantage. So Leonidas wasn't marching his men into some mindless suicide mission. He was actually pulling a tactical masterclass, using the very landscape of Greece as a weapon to defend it. Joined by several thousand soldiers from other city-states, which by the way proves this wasn't just fought by Spartans alone, they dug in and prepared to hold the line.
Which brings us to Section 3. Come and take them. Okay, picture this. Imagine standing in that cramped, rocky pass as the earth is literally shaking with the arrival of this colossal Persian force. King Xerxes, who is supremely confident because, well, look at his numbers, sends over a really simple, arrogant demand to the Greeks. Lay down your weapons and surrender. Leonidas' reply? It is etched into history with just 2 words in Greek. Molon labe. Come and take them. Wow. Right? This wasn't a negotiation anymore. That was a line drawn straight in the sand. With that single, totally defiant phrase, diplomacy was dead, and things had abruptly shifted into an all-out, unyielding war.
So how did they actually manage to fight this overwhelming force? They used something called the hoplite formation. Imagine these Greek soldiers standing super tightly packed, shoulder to shoulder, locking their heavy bronze shields together. And keep in mind, these shields weighed roughly 15 pounds each. They linked them to form this impenetrable wall of bronze, with incredibly long spears just bristling out toward the advancing enemy. Wave after wave after wave of Persian soldiers charged into that narrow pass. And again, they were just shoved back by this disciplined wall. Even Xerxes' absolute elite fighting force, the legendary guys known as the Immortals, threw themselves at the Greek line and completely failed to break it. For 2 full days, the defenders held that pass, proving that superior discipline, intense training, and smart tactics could absolutely overcome seemingly infinite numbers.
But that leads us into Section 4, the ultimate sacrifice.
Sadly, that impenetrable wall of bronze wasn't broken by brute force. It was broken by a devastating betrayal. After the Greek line heroically held out for 2 straight days against totally impossible odds, a local man named Ephialtes shattered their defense. He went to the Persians and revealed a hidden mountain path, which allowed the enemy forces to completely bypass the choke point and sneak up right behind the Greek defenders. When Leonidas found out his army was about to be surrounded, he made a decision that defined his legacy forever. He dismissed the vast majority of the Greek allies. He sent them away so they could survive, escape, and continue the fight another day. But Leonidas, his 300 Spartans, and an incredibly brave group of Thespians and Thebans who flat out refused to leave his side, they stayed behind. They knew for an absolute fact they wouldn't leave Thermopylae alive, but they chose to stay anyway, to delay the Persian advance and protect the retreat of their brothers in arms.
What happened next is almost unimaginable in its sheer desperation and ferocity. The defenders fought until their spears totally shattered. Then, they drew their swords, and when their swords broke against the massive crush of the enemy, they didn't throw their hands up. No way. They continued fighting with their bare hands, their teeth, whatever they could possibly find. It was an incredible final stand. One by one, these insanely brave men fell. King Leonidas himself was killed in the chaotic fighting, and in a final stunning display of loyalty, his remaining warriors fought furiously over his fallen body, protecting their king right to the very bitter end. Ultimately, yes, the Persians did capture the pass, but man, their victory came at a far, far greater cost than they could have ever expected.
And finally, Section 5, the enduring legacy.
You know, it is really easy to look at this whole event as a purely tragic defeat. The men died, the pass was lost. But the true story here is actually one of an incredible ripple effect. Sure, Thermopylae in 480 BC was a tactical loss for the Greeks, coming after their earlier clash at Marathon 10 years prior. But the ultimate sacrifice they made, it wasn't in vain. Just months later, totally fired up and inspired by the unbelievable courage of Leonidas and his men, a newly unified Greek navy pulled off a massive, decisive victory at the Battle of Salamis. And then the very next year, another huge win at the Battle of Plataea. Thermopylae wasn't just a defeat, it was the spark. It proved to all of Greece that this unstoppable Persian war machine could actually bleed, and it inspired the unified resistance that ended up completely crushing Xerxes' entire invasion.
History is shaped by acts of courage that just refuse to be forgotten. Today, we don't remember Thermopylae just because of who won or lost a random piece of rocky land. We remember it because of the extraordinary courage displayed by those who stood against totally impossible odds. The story of Leonidas and his fellow defenders has inspired soldiers, leaders, writers, and frankly, all of us for centuries. It's a really powerful reminder that true victory isn't always about being the last one standing on the battlefield. Sometimes, true victory is the legacy of courage you leave behind to inspire the rest of the world. So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with this one thought. When you inevitably face your own impossible odds in life, what kind of legacy will you choose to leave behind?